Hey everybody, KC here. So I am really excited about this week's entry in my long series of author interviews. I talked to a gentleman named MP Woodward. And MP Woodward is a first-time novelist. This is the book. It's called The Handler. And as you'll hear from the conversation, I love this book. I started reading it and I just could not put it down. It is fascinating. It is a page turner. It's complex. It's an intelligence thriller. It's also an intelligent thriller. And it's got really interesting protagonists, interesting villains. They are all drawn with a level of complexity that I think is really admirable. And we talked a lot about that. We also talked about the fact that MP Woodward, he used to work in the intelligence community. He also used to work for Amazon on the business side. So we had a little chance to talk about Amazon. I really enjoyed my conversation with him. He's a fascinating guy. I'm thrilled. He's going to tell you he's got a sequel coming out. I'm really excited about that. So again, the book is called The Handler. It's by MP Woodward. I can't recommend it enough, and I hope you enjoy my conversation with him. Well, MP Woodward, welcome to Morning Newsbeat. Thanks for doing this.
Hey, Kevin, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, as I've already said to my audience, I love this book. This was a could not put it down kind of book. So I am thrilled to have the opportunity to talk to you. And I think where I want to start is, I'm fascinated. You spent time in the intelligence community before you went into the business world and now an author. There are a lot of people from the intelligence community who are writing books. And I guess my question is, what makes you all such good writers? What is it about being in the intelligence community that gives you the ability to tell a story so compellingly?
I think that's an astute observation. I think it comes from a place, probably two different things. One is intelligence officers are at their heart analysts, and they're trying to figure out what's going on, right? So it's about solving that puzzle. And if you think about popular literature, there is that's kind of the genre, right? We call these intelligence thrillers, but effectively, I think, including with my book, The Handler, they're effectively mysteries. You're wondering what's happening. You're wondering what power is going on behind the scenes. And the heroes in books like this, thrillers like this, are often trying to make sense of things. And I think that many of us that have come from the intelligence world have been in that position. In my case specifically, I had the job at some point to write scenarios, to write out war games, and so it made me want to be a writer from a pretty young age, as a fairly junior officer, because I was writing these war games that were being consumed by vast fleets, the U.S. Pacific fleets, and I really enjoyed the work, and it made you have to think about very complex issues, multilateral issues, things that were going on in the world. And for me, the challenge was always, how do you personify that? How would you dramatize that in a fictional world, but make it feel real? And that's what I tried to do with my book.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought of the word puzzle, but that's exactly what the people in the book are trying to figure out, the puzzle, and we're sort of watching. We're sort of putting the puzzle together as readers as it goes, and that's one of the fascinating things about it. Is there are so many different pieces, and you're jumping from scene to scene and locale to locale and person to person, and it is a fascinating puzzle.
Yeah, thank you. That what I was trying to get across as well is to not just have a sort of a one hero point of view, like just the Americans trying to figure out. Certainly that's a big part of it, but I also wanted to present that from the other side. Like how are the Iranians thinking about it? What do they know versus not know? And what I try to do in these books, and I've just finished the second one, is you sort of want the different actors in this drama to have about 60 to 70% of the information, and to be just a little bit wrong, just a little bit misdirected, just a little bit confused. And then that can cause, I think, tension and misdirection from the other sides. And I had a lot of fun playing with that aspect in writing the book.
I was going to ask you this at the end, but since you brought it up, is the next book a sequel to the same characters?
It is a sequel, same characters, different setting, sort of different intelligence problem, of course, but it's the same world of characters.
Yeah. So what inspired this book? What were there specific, I mean, and in some ways I got to imagine you look at the world, if you read the headlines every day, it's like, I mean, it's got to throw you for a loop wondering, is the world going to catch up with you and pass you in the time it takes you from the time you finish a book and the time it actually gets published? Because that's not a short period of time.
Absolutely right. So first off, when I was an intelligence officer and in the Navy specifically, and thinking about world events and scenarios and stuff, information was so scant, right? We had intelligence reporting certainly, but we also had open source reporting like the news. And back then, that was fairly limited. Now you can read, for example, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps' blog site, right? You can read directly, hey, what are these guys thinking? You can read misinformation. You can read their Telegram accounts. You can read whatever. And I find a lot of these sources to be super inspiring for plot ideas that are realistic. The Jerusalem Times, for example, is one that I've come to read every morning. And you can do all this from the comfort of your own home, which is just not something that was happening when I was younger. So that therein provides a lot of source material. In this particular book, I did have one kind of aha moment of inspiration. It was January 8th, 2020, and a Ukrainian airliner, a civilian airliner, was in Tehran. It was just a regular old civilian flight, and it was packed with, among other people, or a lot of Iranian students who were going to school in Canada. And the flight took off, and the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps air defense units, thought it was a provocation of some kind, very mistakenly. And a surface-to-air missile battery right near this civilian airport shot it down. And a couple hundred people lost their lives. And this was something that just was very visceral and raw to me. You could actually watch this unfold on YouTube. It's out there today still. And it's one of those things, it's just one of those disasters that's kind of lost to time, right? Like we don't think about or talk about it every day. But in the moment,
because of everything that happened here 2 days before that, I was going to say, I read a lot. I mean, I read a lot of newspapers and online. I don't even remember that. And because we were also occupied with what happened on January 6th.
Well, that's true. That's true. And the other thing that there was a vast escalation happening in that we had done a drone strike on the general that ran the Quds Force named Soleimani, and that then caused Iran to retaliate. Then they were in this position where they were wondering, what's the U.S. going to do next? And that's when this happened. That January 6th, I think that you're referring to, is actually 2021. Because that was
of course. Okay, you're right.
November
I keep thinking of the 2020 election. Yeah. You're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah, because I'm sitting here thinking, boy, I don't remember, putting a U.S. coup in the right. But at the time, I was.
Yeah, I'm an idiot.
But at the time, I thought, no, it's all right. At the time, I thought, boy, what if you were just a regular Joe, or even somebody, say, a civilian working in the Iranian defense establishment, and that had been your child on that plane going back to college in Canada, what would you do? How would you react? And in the midst of this intense escalation between the U.S. and Iran, how would that really play out? And that was that was literally the inspiration for the book. And since you've read it, that's more or less the prologue.
Oh, that starts everything off. And then you had the genius idea of making the two protagonists a divorced couple, which creates all sorts of really interesting tensions, both personal and professional. Where'd that come from?
Yeah, I I think it came from two places. One is I I have been married for 28 years, and the I like the idea that the bond is even bigger than the institution of marriage. And the idea that if two people were on the opposing sides of something and their lives were really in danger, that would kind of override everything else. It wouldn't matter really that they were divorced. They'd just been together too long and they'd have had a child and things like that. So that was one thematic aspect that I like. The other is that I wanted the main protagonist. I wanted that to be a professional woman because I've worked with a lot of professional women, both in the intelligence world and military environment, which is kind of male dominated, as well as in the business world. And I like the idea of one of these really strong women, and you have to be strong as a woman to rise to the top in those environments, dealing with all the stuff that they'd be dealing with. And the thought of dealing with also an ex-husband in that environment, I thought seemed realistic. And then it became a kind of a great source of tension and a good dramatic device. That was the thought.
It struck me that you write women. I mean, I can't say this for sure, but it struck me that you write women really well. And you also made one of the real villains a woman who's a very impressive character.
Yeah, I really, like I said, I was kind of inspired by working women. Also because I met my wife when I was in the Navy. She was a helicopter pilot, went to the Naval Academy. I'd seen her and her friends and other folks that I work with. I'd seen them in these environments where there tend to be more men, I find their responses and reactions to it to be sort of amusing, and I wanted that in this character almost as a foil to how men could be, and that I don't think that I necessarily set out to write it that way, but that's certainly what took off in my head.
You consider yourself a plot guy or a character guy?
I would consider I mean, you don't have the luxury of being one or the other. I don't think, but I would consider myself more of a character guy. I enjoy writing the inner dialogues and kind of the interiority of characters, and hopefully letting the reader sort of live through them. And I would make this editorial comment. I spent a lot of time in the streaming media industry, and a lot of people ask, what's the future of books? What's the future of reading? People there's so much competition now for your entertainment time. And I think that's true, but I think books occupy this unique niche where you really can get inside to somebody's head much deeper. And you can ask yourself as a reader, "Now, what would I do in that situation?" And you can do that a little bit in movies, but it's quick, right? With a book, you can really go kind of deeper. And I love playing around with the idea that people aren't always thinking the most professional things, right? They're not always going, "I'm going to do this for the sake of honor and for the sake of the United States, because it's the right thing to do, damn it," right? Sometimes they're thinking, "Boy, this will look good on my resume," or I've got, greed, or I've got lust, or whatever. And I really wanted those things to be competing as values in what motivated the characters.
Yeah. Well, I think it's interesting because the book strike is very visual. I mean, I don't know if you've made a movie deal yet, but I mean, this strikes me as being, I mean, this could be a terrific movie, but it would be different because by its very nature, a movie being a visual medium, they're going to strip away some of I mean, they'll leave some of the character stuff there, but it would just be a different animal, which is fine. It's just going to be different.
Yeah, I think so. You get in. I'm certainly getting an education. I had spent time with filmmakers in my position at Amazon, and then now I'm talking to filmmakers as you suggest, and it's kind of it's an interesting education to take something that you wrote and where you thought a lot about these characters, and to see how they would interpret it. And there's a number of decisions to be made. One is, a filmmaker has to say, is this a movie or is this a series, right? That's a thing now. And so you sort of start from there. If you think of a popular, really character-driven series, like one of my favorites is probably Breaking Bad, where you really see, a guy have choice after choice after choice, and you're inside his head. Well, they play that out over, 50 episodes or something. But in a movie, you can't. And so in a 2-hour thing, that's the comment I hear a lot, is that the narrative arc would do really, really well as a movie. And then that would mean making choices on the characters, right? Like who do you spend as much time on the villains and really understand them, or do you just sort of get it that, okay, yeah, they're going to do this or they're going to do that. The most of the interest I think that I've had has been on the heroine, on the idea of a strong woman in this world. And I think that the relationship dynamic that we talked about earlier, where the relationship sort of takes center stage. I think that's one of those choices that I've heard from filmmakers.
It is interesting because, and I've interviewed a bunch of authors, and it's funny, like Mark Greaney, and I think that
Yeah.
the Gray Man books and have certain similarities to what you've done here, and yet I watch what they've, at least I've seen the trailer for the movie, right, and it's like, it doesn't seem like the book to me, and I'm sure it'll be really entertaining. But I was like I thought what they've done with Bosch on Amazon, for example, has been the absolute right way to adapt a series.
Yeah.
They've done a really, really good job with it, because they've made changes where they need to make it, but they've shown a certain amount of fidelity to the character, which I always think is important. So, well, I wish you good luck in those conversations, because once they cut a check, I don't know how much role you'll have, right? At that point, it's theirs.
Well, I think that's it, right? I'm an relatively unknown author, right? This is a debut novel. And so I think people can take the story and like the story. If you are a very influential author, right. If you're Stephen King, you have a much bigger stake in the story. And I know Bosch is an interesting example. I was close to it with Amazon. And Michael Connolly, the author of the Bosch series, great series of books, super involved, right? I don't know that he wrote every episode, but he was very involved in the screenplay, and that comes across. But again, it gets back to that luxury of, hey, there's 5 seasons here. Right. And I'm very anxious to see the Gray Man movie. It'll be fascinating to see how they adapt that on Netflix.
Robert B. Parker, who I interviewed a bunch of times, used to say that his chief role, once they paid him for whatever it was to A, give notes that they would ignore, and B, cash the check, and not worry. And he said, he used to say, I can't worry about it. It's the books are mine, the TV series, the movie, whatever they are, that's theirs, and I can't really worry about that. Let's talk a little bit about Amazon, because you were at Amazon for a number of years. And what did you do actually out there, and how different is Amazon from being in the intelligence game?
It's a lot different than the intelligence game. Yes, and I mean, I'll point out some overlaps. So first off, my job there was I was a business development executive and helped grow Prime memberships and Prime Video engagement around the world by doing distribution deals with other telecommunications companies, media companies, things like that around the world. So in the end, I operated about 140 partnerships in 40 countries. And Amazon's a very global business. The video business is very global. We had distribution rights in more or less every country in the world. And in doing that, you get the nice thing is that you're sort of hands-on in this new world of streaming media, and it feels like everybody's in streaming media now, right? And now when you watch TV, it's pick the app you want to watch, as opposed to the way it felt just 5 or 6 years ago. But 5 or 6 years ago, that wasn't that obvious. And so getting out there and proselytizing that and doing the missionary work to kind of get that off the ground around the world was a big deal. The relationship between or similarities between Amazon and the intelligence world Amazon is extremely exacting and extremely precise. They they take risks, certainly, and I've never been anywhere that innovates more than Amazon does, but they are the most highly calculated risks that you could possibly imagine. And they don't move forward without carefully considering all the information at hand. And the job of somebody at Amazon is really to have a vision, have an idea, be part of this super dynamic, innovative workforce, come up with something, and then get that supported, get buy-in in the organization. And effectively, they will treat you almost like a venture capitalist would treat an entrepreneur.
Mhm.
And you bring them your business plan, they fund it, and then you're off to the races. And so in that way, it's very dynamic. Executives at Amazon are super autonomous, but nothing happens without very, very precise thought going into it beforehand.
We talked before about how in the intelligence community, you would have to write out, war game plans, and that, and
Yeah.
also the other thing about Amazon is they, in essence, they're not war game plans, but they kind of are, right? Because when you write out a business plan and a proposal, they believe in narrative, they believe in prose, they don't believe in PowerPoints. And so you've got to actually, tell a story in a way that's going to persuade the people that to whom you report to do whatever it is you want to do. And that's got to add to your storytelling street cred as well.
I think that's it. If you think about a place like Amazon or the other really large organizations, in the case of Amazon, it's super horizontal by design, and so you don't have a lot of layers between you and the people that run the business. And as you're out there trying to put together this vision for something, your job is, like an intelligence officer, is to be an analyst, is to analyze the entire field, the entire landscape, analyze the things that might happen, the resources that would be necessary, for the things that you want to happen, the risks associated with it. But then, as you suggest, a good analysis can sit on the shelf and be only understood by the analyst. It's the storytelling around that really makes people get it and captures their imaginations and makes them think, yeah, this is a smart idea. This is something we want to do. I can picture this, right? And I think every entrepreneur goes through that, right? They may have the best idea on the planet. They may have analyzed that thing from here to kingdom come, but ultimately they're going to be facing that venture capitalist and asking that person to fund it. And if they don't capture that venture capitalist imagination and get them to see it right away, it's one meeting and over. Sure, there's going to be other meetings that are going to be about due diligence and really digging in and, do I believe this, this dazzling entrepreneur or not? But it does start with that vision and being able to tell that story.
Well, that's something we talk a lot about here on Morning Newsbeat, in the sense of, when I talk to retailers, I talk to even suppliers, is the importance of telling a story to your customers, right? You're more successful if you tell a story to your customers, and more successful, frankly, if you tell a story to your employees, right? If everybody sort of understands the common narrative, then things move, at least in the same direction, if not more smoothly. And a narrative is a powerful thing. It's why I was up till 2 a.m. reading your book, right? A great narrative is powerful. It it grabs you by the whatever and keeps you with it, which is, again, one of the advantages of a great book.
When I was making this transition from writing narratives in a business context for Amazon, or an intelligence context prior to that, to writing a book, I spent a lot of time analyzing the way books are constructed and the way stories are constructed. And I've sort of come away with this point of view that there's just something in our psychology, in our development as humans, where we react to stories. And there's certain ways that stories have to be told that we react to. I almost feel like there's some kind of hidden storytelling code. And if you're doing your job right as a novelist, you're hitting on that, and people are feeling entertained without even knowing it, because you're finding that code and you're presenting things in the right way. And I find that to be challenging. I think that's a really hard thing to do. I think great novelists do it really, really well, and they do it out of habit. But it gets back to that how do you tell that story, right? There's a million different ways to do it, and the way that you actually present what's happening to a reader is, I think, what makes for good literature.
Who do you read? Who do you like to read?
Well, I think in the modern genre of other spy thrillers, you mentioned Mark Greaney earlier. I've read a lot of his stuff. I'm a fan of David Ignatius, if you're familiar with his work.
Washington
Going
Post?
back a bit, yeah, going back a bit, I like John le Carré for character development. I also liked Forsyth for his kind of slow burn of plots. And then I'm a fan of Tom Clancy. When I was in the military as an intelligence officer, Tom Clancy was the techno thriller genre was very popular at the time, and it had that broad sweep of characters and sort of that global point of view and educated. But even across all those different authors, I can think of ones where it's like I like them for specific reasons. I like Greaney because I think his action rocks. I think it's gritty, and you can like think of yourself, okay, if I was in that fight, what would I do? I like Forsyth because of that slow burn sort of mentality, like you're on this long arc, you're on this journey, and it's ultimately going to be satisfying. And I like Clancy because it's pieces from distant parts of a globe or a landscape that ultimately come together, and they're going to, but you're enjoying solving that puzzle as they do.
So last question. As somebody with a background in the intelligence community, I can't help but ask you, so should we be more worried or less worried about what we see in the headlines every day? When you read it, do you go, uh-oh?
Look, I'd like to be a pie-eyed optimist and say, nothing to see here. But in my view, we went from a great power competition called the Cold War, where rules were fairly well established, and that informed a lot of great spy novels, by the way, right? And then the Cold War ended in the 90s, or in 1989, and then in the 90s, you effectively had one superpower with the United States, and a lot of other countries trying to figure out what to do next. And we then, I think, from a global security standpoint, really the Islamic terrorism took off as our main security threat, and that was something very visceral to people. So we thought a lot about that throughout the 2000s. Sadly, I feel that we're back to that great power competition, and I think we're in Cold War 2.0. And the Cold War 2.0 really has three actors. I think the senior partners in this are China and Russia, and Iran is the junior partner. And given the state of technology, I just think that the speed of operations, the speed of espionage, et cetera, are much different and much blurrier. And I think we're all figuring it out. You're watching that play out in Ukraine right now, where you've got civilians joining the fight. You've got hackers joining the fight just because they want to, right? So it is really different, and I think it worries me just in terms of the fact that the threat is wider and more diffuse and more diverse than it has been before, and that's always going to be a challenge, I think, for our security establishment to handle that. Now, hopefully, there are people a lot smarter than me that are in position that are thinking about that day and night and have the dynamism to go after those types of threats. But maybe it's my nature as a former intelligence officer. I worry about it for sure.
Well, listen, if nothing else, it will continue to give you fodder for which to write what I hope will be a long series of novels. I want to make sure I hold it up again. This is The Handler by P Woodward. This is just a terrific, I mean, I never would have believed it was your first novel. It's so good.
Thank you.
You just can't put it down. I wish you great success with it. And I hope whenever the sequel comes out, you'll come back on Morning Newsbeat and talk about it.
I'd love to, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a blast.
I've really enjoyed this. Thanks. Take care now.